Okay, it's 12 noon, so I think we'll start. Hello, everybody. I'm Wendy Craig, and I'm the Scientific Director of PREVNet. And on behalf of our team, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today. Wherever you are located, please join us in acknowledging and thanking the generations of Indigenous peoples who have cared for these lands and in celebrating the continued strength and spirit of Indigenous people. We are bringing today's webinar from the Community of Practice to address teen dating violence, funded by the Public Health Agency of Canada. The webinar today is being led by Dr. Leena Augimeri, co-founder and director of SNAP, Scientific and Program Development at the Child Development Institute, co-founder of the SNAP Now and Plan model, and an adjunct professor at the University of Toronto. Her webinar is entitled SNAP, National Expansion in Canada, Important Learnings Along Our SNAP Scaling Journey. So before I go into a full introduction, that was just a brief one, I want to go through the webinar format for today. So Leena's going to present for about 55 minutes, and during her presentation, we'll invite you to type any questions or comments that you may have for her into the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen. We'll track those questions, and then I'll pull from them and present them to Leena at the end of her presentation during the last 15 minutes of the webinar. I get to do what I've always wanted to be, a talk show host. At the end of the webinar, in the chat box, you will also see a link to the evaluation, and that's the evaluation of this webinar. We really value the response that people provide to us through these evaluations, and they help guide us in planning our future webinars. So all of your feedback's anonymous, so please take the 2 minutes, and it really is just 2 minutes to complete the survey. Once you have completed the evaluation form, you'll be directed to a website where you'll be prompted to enter your full name and email address. And once you've done that, a certificate of attendance will be generated and emailed to you. It's completely separate from your evaluation, so your name is not associated with it. It's just to ensure that you get your certificate of attendance. We're also recording the webinar today, and we'll send out a link to everyone that's registered so they can share the recording or listen to it if they weren't able to join us. Also, we'll be sending out the key takeaways, not the slides per se, but the key takeaways in English and French from today's presentation so that you can have a summary of it to review. So now it's my distinct pleasure, and I've had the honor to know and have met and worked with Leena for many, many years. And so I'm really excited about today's presentation because I know from personal experience, I always learn when I'm with Leena, and I always learn to be better or do something better after hearing her talk. So really excited about today's talk. And just let me tell you a bit about her so you'll understand where she's coming from. She's the co-founder and director of the SNAP, Scientific and Program Development at the Child Development Institute. She's the co-founder of the Stop Now and Plan model and an adjunct professor at the University of Toronto. For over 33 years, Leena has focused on the development, research, dissemination, and implementation of SNAP, an evidence-based, gender-specific model and comprehensive crime prevention framework for young children with serious disruptive behavior problems. She has authored numerous publications, has conducted hundreds of presentations and keynote addresses. She has also received many prestigious awards, such as the national recipient of the CAMH Difference Makers of 150 Leading Canadians for Mental Health, the Child Welfare League of Canada's inaugural Outstanding Achievement Research and Evaluation Award, the Prime Minister's Regional Social Innovation Award, and Elizabeth Mason Award for exemplary contributions to the promotion of children's mental health. She is currently leading a multi-million-dollar 5-year national implementation strategy to bring SNAP to 140 new communities across Canada, using innovative venture philanthropy model to help create massive social change and help change the landscape of children's mental health in Canada. So clearly you can see she's well experienced. She's been working with this program for many years and has learned many valuable lessons along the way. And so for all of us today who are listening, we'll have an opportunity to gain valuable nuggets from this. So I'm delighted to have her with us, and I'm now going to turn the presentation over to her.
Thank you, Wendy, and welcome everybody. It's really an honor to do this in collaboration with PREVNet, who's one of our national partners with SNAP. And as Wendy indicated, this presentation is really going to focus on the national expansion. But before I begin, I'd like to introduce you to Margaret Walsh. Margaret, you want to introduce yourself for a second?
Hello, everybody. I'm a Senior Manager of SNAP Evaluation Research and Data Systems, and I've been working with Leena now for some 20 years, and excited to be here.
Excellent, thank you. And Nicola Slater, who's our implementation manager, would also be here, but she's still in the UK. We just got back from the UK in Glasgow at the Global Implementation Conference. So before I begin, I would like to really acknowledge some key acknowledgements. We're getting a bit of feedback on this system here. So first, I'd like to acknowledge that CDI, where we are right now, in which I'm working in, is situated upon the territories, and the territories include the Wendat and Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and the Métis Nation. I also recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples of this land. I also cannot do this presentation without thanking the children, youth, and families in our communities who we have really the utmost privilege of working with, who share their experience with us, the various levels of government that support SNAP, especially the Ontario and federal government, and our philanthropic donors and foundations, as well as our extensive network of community partners like PREVNet, researchers, practitioners, business sector partners, and SNAP affiliates. And of course, our own SNAP CDI team here, which involve our clinical research, development, implementation, and operations and administration. So I just needed to do that before we begin. So really, I'm going to speak about, we said it was 33 years, but actually on October 1st, which is in a couple of days, we're actually going to be celebrating our 34th anniversary when we opened our doors on October 1st, 1985. So we're getting there. And really, this is about a journey of innovation, impact, and awareness. And the three words that I really feel strongly is what SNAP is about and what it took us to get to where we are today is it takes grit, heart, and courage. And I don't know if you can see, but behind me on this wall right here to my left is SNAP around the world, and it's various sections of the world where SNAP is currently being implemented. I apologize in advance if I sound a little choppy. I have a really bad cold I'm navigating. And so if I need a break, Mark will fill it for me for a second. So I want to first thank you for participating in today's webinar. I know it takes time, an hour of precious time out of your busy schedules to participate. But I guess my question for you really is these things. The first thing is, let's start with the why. Why were you interested in participating in this webinar? And really think about that as I go through my presentation. And then also, as I talk about our SNAP journey, especially how we got to scale, I'd love to hear about hearing about some of our key learnings along this path. I want you to really think about your own work, where you are, similarities, differences, etc. And I'm hoping at the end of this, I'd welcome hearing what were some of your key things that resonated with you that I may have shared. I'd also appreciate you sharing with me at least one thing that you heard that either inspired you to think differently or that you found to be possibly helpful to enhance the work you're doing. Because I always think if I'm participating in something, if I can walk away with one fact, one strategy, one something, then it's absolutely worth it. So I'm going to get back to this at the end of the presentation. So the very first thing, welcome. This is SNAP, and he's actually from our SNAP for Schools app, which we are in the process of piloting in a number of schools across Canada, and I'll talk about that a bit later. So the webinar objectives is really to provide an overview of the why we developed SNAP, also introduce you to the unique and innovative funding model to support children's mental health, which Wendy indicated was called venture philanthropy, and I will explain that to you. Learn more about a comprehensive implementation model to build capacity for mental health and community-based professionals, and it's really a model that kind of pushes the boundaries a bit. I hope you're going to have a lot of takeaways about our lessons learned or our challenges along this journey of scaling this evidence-based model, including some practical tips and strategies for other scalable programs and models that you may be considering. We're going to share a regional mobilization and a community partnership design. And we're also going to introduce you to a community implementation plan and how technology is helping us scale and do the work we're doing, which includes fit, feasibility, and a readiness assessment that we're going to share with you. So before I begin, I want to situate a little bit who Marg and I and where we're from. We're from a wonderful organization called the Child Development Institute in Toronto. It's an accredited children's mental health agency that has been around for about 120-something years now. It's situated, like I said, right in the city of Toronto, Canada. It has an established track record of success, and SNAP was established over 34 years ago in 1985, and it was established to meet a gap in services when Canada raised the age of criminal responsibility from 7 to 12 in 1984. And today it is considered an evidence-based program. I'm going to share how that is, and also global presence. And you can see from the 4 squares, what we have at CDI is we have early intervention services that the SNAP clinical services fall under. We have a family violence stream. We have what we call a healthy child development stream, which is early learning centers. And then we have something called Integra, which pertains to kids with learning disabilities and mental health challenges. So the focus of our work has really been in the SNAP program is the middle years. These are kids between the ages 6 and 11, which we call the forgotten group. And we feel that there's a lot of attention that's been placed on the 0 to 6, rightly so, very critical developmental phase, and 12 and older. But what we find is somehow that middle group is a quieter group, and somehow they tend to get forgotten because there are not as many issues going on or some other things. So we need to really pay attention. And just as a bit about 2 years now, in Ontario, they just launched a middle year strategy. Prior to that, there was no strategy. There was an under 6 strategy and there was an over 12. But now, thankfully, we do have a middle year strategy. This is the comprehensive crime prevention mental health strategy, that framework, I would say, that we've developed or we've been developing over the last 34 years. So if you have kids or youth with children and youth with disruptive behavior problems, serious disruptive behavior problems, how do they get to the door in a timely manner? And in 1999, we started to launch what we call these police community referral protocols. It's a one-stop number that a police officer, a child welfare worker, a parent, anybody can call to get the kids to the door in a timely manner. And Manitoba, for example, ended up taking our concept, we worked with them, and they created the Turnabout program in Manitoba as a result of this police community referral protocol. So it's something to really think about in your communities. How do we get kids to the door in a timely manner? Now, the reality is, when you launch something like this, it is time consuming because someone has to be the champion of it, somebody has to manage it. The other piece of this work then is once you get them to the door, do you have really good ways to assess for level of risk and need? And so in 1998, we embarked with Dr. Chris Webster on creating these risk need assessment tools, which are gender specific. One is called the Early Assessment Risk List for Boys, the 20B, and Early Assessment Risk List for Girls, the 21G. And these tools are currently now being revised thanks to Public Safety Canada funding. But they have been validated, they're considered reliable, validated tools to assess level of risk and need. We also use standardized measures like the Child Behavior Checklist, the Behavioral Assessment Scale, and other standardized measures to inform how we would rate the EARLs. And then the EARLs give us a risk need assessment to help with clinical risk management. And then once you have a way to get them to the door, a way to assess them for level of risk and need, do you have gender-specific, evidence-based models to meet the needs of these kids? And that's what SNAP is about, and I'm going to go into that in more detail. You'll see in 1985, we started the program. In 1996, we decided to become gender-specific because the science informed that we needed to. And in 2012, we introduced the SNAP Youth Justice Model. So I'm going to start with the why. When we actually think about programs and what we do, we always say what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. But in fact, we should always start with the why. So why do you do, what do you do, and what's your purpose? And Simon Sinek has this perfect diagram, which I absolutely love, which really speaks about why do you do this, what you do, how do you do that, and then what do you do? And I think this is important for anybody to start thinking about it, and it's called the golden circle. And I hope you'll see that throughout the presentation, how we navigate that. So our why is that prior to 1985, kids as young as 12 could be charged for a criminal offense in Canada. And Canada made a great move in 1984 to raise the age of criminal responsibility from 7 to 12 under the Young Offenders Act, now the Youth Juvenile Justice Act. And so what ended up happening was, as a result of that, there was a huge gap in services. There was a bit of an outcry. A lot of people felt these kids were untouchable. There was nothing they can do. And so therefore, we determined there was something we needed to do. Given the expertise at the former Earls Court Child and Family Center, which is now the Child Development Institute, we decided we needed to think about what was out there based on the best research, the best evidence, the best practice to figure out what we can do to provide services for these kids. Because the key is good enough is no longer enough. And I think that's an important message we want to do, because if we don't, we see all kinds of headlines like this in our papers every single day about our young people engaging in antisocial or acts that commit violence. So a lot of people will say, what's wrong with these kids? And I can tell you so many times I've been at events and someone will say, well, what is wrong with these kids? But we know from Perry and the research of researchers like that, that it's really the wrong question. What we should be asking is, what happened to these kids? Not that we're advocating their responsibility. These kids are responsible for their actions, but we need to really think about what works and how we can help them. Because what we're only seeing is the behavior. What we're not seeing is what's behind the behavior. And trauma is only one thing, but we know that we need to be thinking broader and figuring out what's going on with these kids. Here's an example of Kevin, who will share, and Emma, a little bit of that.
When people look at me, they see a bully, a delinquent, a problem. People see my outbursts, my fit, my frustration. People see the trips to the principal's office, and the kid didn't want to go to class. They see a liar, a troublemaker, a lost cause. They see my outbursts, my dirty looks, my frustration. People see the girl who gets sent home from school, and the girl you wouldn't leave alone with your purse. People see a bad son, that boy who made the kid cry, or who'd ruin your birthday party. People see all these things, but they don't see me. People see a mean sister, who I swear at my dad, and the kid who leaves their mom crying in the parking lot. People see all these things, but they don't see me. My name is Kevin, and I can be more than this. My name is Emma, and I can be more than this.
So as you can see, the kids are saying, see me, don't see my behavior. And so we need to think about what else is going on. So we know about social determinants of health, and we know there's all kinds of really strong, important building blocks that create healthy child development, like good social supports, relationships, attachment, safety, gender, biology, the community, education, etc. But when things go wrong, and things can go wrong, that's where we start having kids that are having mental health issues, engaging in antisocial behavior, and kids who even use weapons like guns in our communities. So we need to think about what else we can do, because as one of our colleagues in the Cayman Islands has said, it's like the perfect storm. And what we see is our kids are facing all kinds of stressful risk factors, such as school failure, addictions, racism, poor parenting, abuse, poverty, neglect, mental health issues, which cause them to experience all kinds of things like being anxious, angry, sad, stressed, etc. And when these kids don't get the help they need, what that can lead to is more school problems, major family issues, mental health problems, and even incarceration. And so we need to think about, what do we need to do? And so we have some big problems. And in Canada, for example, when we look at the facts, we spend over $51 billion in mental health costs. And 1 out of 5 children have mental health issues. We also know is that we have the 3rd highest suicide rate in the industrial country. And when you think about parents, 50% of parents are concerned about their child's anxiety. And I think that's probably going to even increase even more. We have huge, long waiting lists. In Toronto alone, we have kids waiting at least 2 years for SNAP. If you look at the records of incarcerated males, 60% had history of childhood conduct problems. And then when you think about, we have to think about equity issues. Are our programs culturally responsive and safe? Because if we don't, the estimated cost for one serious violent and chronic offender is around $1.5 to $6.5 million. And the sad thing is that 76% of parents don't even know where to find help for their child. So when we think about our kids and we think about their needs, we need to think about what should we be doing. And we need to think about this in a culturally responsive and safe manner as well. And if you're going to walk away with one stat, I think this is a really critical one. It's called the forgotten group, which is what I started this presentation with. So what we found from researchers, they said that kids who end up in court for committing a serious violent offense is 14 and a half. If you go back into their records, they started having minor problems at age 7. Any kindergarten teacher can identify and tell you who they're concerned about. Just before their 9th birthday, 9.5, they start to have some more serious behavior problems like theft and shoplifting, for example. And just before their 12th birthday, they commit their first serious delinquent offense. And at 14 and a half, they're in court. 7 years of warning, 7-year incubation period. And so this is a really important stat when you think about all the individuals that may have come in contact with that child from the age of 7 to 14. And think about where kids are. The majority of them are in school or in recreation, etc. And so if we don't, what we know is the 7 years of warning or 7-year incubation period is what we know is these are the kids most likely to use weapons, including guns, become gang affiliated, as well as engage in substance use. 7 years of warning, 7-year incubation period. So when we think about 1.5 to 2.5 or 6.5 million, that's a lot of money for one individual. Public Safety Canada has an excellent document they produced in 2016 called The Story of Tyler, and I'm going to show one slide a little bit down. But when you think about response to crime, I'm going to put more police officers on the road, anticipation of crime, for example. I'm going to build more jails. Results of crime, I'm going to put more security systems all over the place. Those things add up. And when you start thinking about things like, oops, went too fast, slow it, sorry. Custody, victim costs, policing, security, health costs, mental health, education, emergency room, those things all add up, and that's where you can get to that $6.5 million. So we need to really think about how we can help these kids earlier. We hear lots about adverse childhood experiences. We know that all those risk factors that I talked about earlier can disrupt neurodevelopment, cause social, emotional, and cognitive impairment. And that's where you have the adoption of health risk behaviors, disease, disability, and social problems, and early death. So what happens to you matters, and we need to start remembering that. This is where, when we start to learn about SNAP, and we brought on our neuropsychologist, Dr. Areti Smarathi, she started to help us to understand what might be going on in the brain. Because from a cognitive behavioral perspective, we weren't looking at this as readily as from a neuroscience perspective. Here are the brain regions that control impulsivity and inhibition and emotional processing and regulation network. So when you look at the brains of impaired children who may be experiencing antisocial behavior, you can see that they're mapping on to this very similar brain regions that control these things. So that's why a lot of people will say we definitely need to intervene early. The brain is plastic and can be changed and modified through life, but it gets harder the older we get. Doesn't mean it can't be changed. It can actually be changed. But a sweet spot that Alex Picaro and David Farrington and others keep telling us is that prior to age 10 or that middle year seems to be a great sweet spot to teach kids how to stop and think before they act and make better choices in the moment. And that's what SNAP is all about.
There has been one tweet that I would like to call attention to. So many signs that the Florida shooter was mentally disturbed, even expelled for bad and erratic behavior. Neighbors and classmates knew he was a big problem, must always report such instances to authorities again and again. We did, time and time again. Since he was in middle school, it was no surprise to anyone who knew him. He threw that he was the shooter.
So again, it's the impact of how do we catch these kids earlier to help them, to get them back on the right track. As Emma indicated, since he was in middle school, it was no surprise to anyone who knew him to hear that he was the shooter. And so why are we not building safety nets to catch these kids and catch them earlier? Here's just some key facts from not only newspaper articles, but also from the Picaro and Farrington and Jennings that really show the importance of self-regulation, emotion regulation, self-control. And you can see that self-control programs are an effective intervention for reducing delinquency and problem behaviors. Latent stage middle or middle years children, especially under the age of 10, to be great candidates for learning self-control. And if I think about what we did absolutely right from the beginning when we started developing SNAP, and that was led by Kenneth Goldberg, who was our executive director and my boss at the time, was really embedding an entire program around self-control. So that was 34 years ago, that vision of doing that right. And so really, we worked closely with the Toronto Police Service to develop a program to meet the kids in the city of Toronto. And that's how we started the SNAP program. So here's SNAP again. And so really, it's really teaching kids how to stop and think before they act and make better choices in the moment. So here's the elevator pitch, if we had to say one, for SNAP. You can see we talk about it as an evidence-based, trauma-informed, gender-specific model that teaches elementary school-aged children with disruptive behavior problems and their parents how to stop and think before they act and make better choices in the moment. And if we do that, we know that it improves disruptive behavior, increases self-control, we can sustain change, it reduces crime, it can be cost-effective, and we've been working on the last decade and a half ensuring culturally responsive and safe programming for specific communities and building healthy communities. And we are absolutely embedded what we call within a scientist practitioner model, where science informs practice and practice informs science. And you can see we started with a technique that was actually started in our day treatment classroom here at the former Rose Court Child and Family Center, where we just needed the kids to actually stop. But it wasn't manualized, it wasn't a program, it was just a strategy. And I believe that was Barbara Dubois who really created that piece. And then you can see we developed a program around it, and we developed principles and theoretical underpinnings, and research is part of it from day one. So when I was hired, I was the first researcher through the door. Then we hired a family worker. We hired a child worker and a family worker. And the three of us, along with Ken, worked hard, as well as Dr. Deborah Pepler, to create this program at that time. So if we think about what is the nugget of SNAP, the nugget of SNAP is really teaching kids how their thoughts, their feelings, and their actions are all interrelated. And that is within the cognitive behavioral model. And so we'll share that a little bit more. Here are the 9 principles in theoretical orientation. So you can see the principles are, community responsive, accountable service excellent, the scientist practitioner, client-centered, gender-sensitive, ecosystemic, strength-based, continuing service, collaborative, and community responsive. And here are the 5 theories within a developmental framework, from cognitive behavioral to attachment to social learning to the feminist to systems. And the social learning really was, we worked closely with the Oregon Social Learning Center, which is where Generation PMTO and Marion Forgatch and Gerald Patterson. And so we worked closely with them at the very beginning to really help us develop that parenting piece of our model. The other thing is we realized as we were being invited into Indigenous communities, so we were being invited in to implement SNAP in these communities, we had to pause and think that, can you take this mainstream program, which was developed in a very diverse city like the city of Toronto, and would it be culturally responsive, relevant, and safe for Indigenous children and families? And so we embarked with our Indigenous partners to do some co-development, co-creation, and we came up with this guide, which is Starting Your Community Journey with SNAP and Indigenous Communities. This guide is actually Patty Chambé, is that right? I'm saying that name right, correct? Is the one really working closely with us from Candor College. And so we're working with her to revise this as we speak, and it should be ready shortly. But really, it's not only about us as trainers and as implementers or purveyors of the model going into communities to think about what we have to think about, but it's also about when a community wants to invite us in, what they need to think about in regards to SNAP to ensure that it's a right fit for their community. As a result of that, the Ontario government approached us and said, could you do the exact same concept or idea with the Black and African Canadian community? And so they hired Turner Consulting Group to work alongside us to create a similar type of guide, but for use with the Black and African Canadian community, specifically under the Services for Black Children, Youth, and Families. And so I'll share a little bit more about that work. So getting into the model, our evidence-based models that we have been researching and implementing since 1985 and then 1996 have been the SNAP Boys and the SNAP Girls model. These are clinical interventions for children ages 6 to 11 with serious disruptive behavior problems in their families. And as a result, in 1996, when we became gender specific and introduced the two models, we also introduced a continued care model. And as a result, we started a SNAP Youth Leadership component, which we would work with the youth, especially the highest risk youth, up to their 18th birthday if it's warranted. And it helps with, for example, mentoring and individual befriending and community connections and employment and school support, for example. Because we know that these kids who have complex issues, a 12-week or 3-month program isn't sufficient, even though you get excellent effects like we actually did. We also realized that it was important that we actually connect with the children's schools and tell the teacher what we were actually teaching the kids. Because if we didn't do that and the child was generalizing their skills and using them in class, and they use their SNAP skills, and say their SNAP skills was, take a deep breath, count to 10, challenge their heart thought and say, you know what, I'm just going to walk away, that may be seen as a negative, not a positive. So we went into the schools, we worked with the teachers, we taught the teacher the strategy, we also at times taught the whole classroom the strategy. And as we went into classrooms, the teachers and the educators would say, well, why can't my whole class, why can't the whole school learn this strategy? Everybody should learn what the SNAP strategy is, because we all should be able to learn how to stop and think before we act and make better choices in the moment. And it was simple and easy to understand. So we started to embark on a SNAP for schools, which is more of our universal model for kids. So here are the 3 levels. What happened was, and Marg being the SNAP police here beside me, is we were really aimed at only implementing level 1. Level 1 is our SNAP Boys and our SNAP Girls, which are full continued care clinical interventions. So it consists of 13 weekly concurrent SNAP parent and children's groups. They last for an hour and a half every week for 13 weeks in a row. And then all the other SNAP components are available to them based on their level of risk and need. And I'll show you a whiteboard video that describes that. But as we went into communities, we realized absolutely not all communities are equal. And I'll be honest, that was a huge learning experience for me as I started to go across the country, that a lot of organizations didn't have the capacity to do ongoing continued care, or they didn't have the capacity to do certain components that SNAP felt were critical, like, for example, individual befriending, but they had a Boys and Girls Club that they can partner with, etc. So we ended up deciding to also implement a SNAP Boys and Girls time-limited model, which is more a focus group model. However, we also know that works because our first randomized control trial was a group focus model. Then the third model was our SNAP in Schools Universal Prevention, because what we also know is that a lot of organizations or communities didn't even have a children's mental health center or a community-based organization, but they had a school. So what if we work with the school? And what if we try to then build more capacity within communities by figuring out how to get them to partner with other services? So those are the 3 service deliveries. And then the last one we started to implement in 2012 was our SNAP Youth Justice model, thanks to Justice Canada. And Justice Canada supported this build as well as the Ontario government to test a program that Marg and I designed specifically for kids between 12 and 18 years of age that were involved already in the justice system. So custody, probation, and community attendance. And at first it was just custody, but what we realized is very fast that kids will leave custody and go into probation or community, and if they're learning that strategy, nobody in those two other streams would know what that is. So we needed to figure out how to build a seamless system of service delivery, and that's what we did with that program as well. So this is the continuum of care, if you can see about this. SNAP, let me just clarify here as I take a breath here for a second, and I apologize if I'm talking really fast. But that's how it feels. So if you're an innovator and you're implementing, you're developing, you feel like you're in your treadmill. That's what it feels like. SNAP is one program that meets a specific need for children and families. We are not saying it's the only program. We know it's an effective evidence-based program that works if it's implemented with high fidelity and integrity, but we also need all kinds of other programs in communities to help our children and our families. But when we develop this program, you can see we're saying that there's different levels of degree of dosage and severity of risk that will be required to meet the needs of your kids, with the most serious, lowest risk to the most serious. So I'm going to show you this whiteboard video that will describe SNAP, and then I'm going to get into more about the implementation and the research. Oh, sorry about that. I'm going to go back down, and let's see if I can get that going. Oh, yeah, it's stuck. Hold on 1 second. Sorry about that, guys. Did you try this one?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll take a deep breath. So I want you to think about, I know what I was going through was quite quick and fast, but what I'd like you to think about is, as you think about your own innovations, your own programs, your own models, I want you to think about where you are along this journey. Has it been similar? Has it been very different? And hopefully by the end, we'll be able to speak about some of that stuff. I'm just going to check to see what's going on here, because otherwise we'll bypass this video. Yeah. Okay, sorry guys, we're going to have to wait a second here. Okay, we're going to have to restart the PowerPoint, but we're not going to lose our group. Okay, let's restart it then. Sorry about that. Okay, we will get it up in 1 minute.
You were on 550.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Leena, maybe while that's going up, I just could ask you, someone had asked if a teenager was in the justice system, can SNAP still help them?
If SNAP was in the what system?
I said, if a
Justice system.
teenager.
Yeah, so we have some incredible results. I'm going to bypass the video for now, I think, just because if we have time at the end, I could show you if that's okay. So the question was, if a teenager's in justice, yes. So what we're finding is and you have to keep in mind that one thing that Marg and I were concerned about when we were developing this justice model was that because that's all they're getting is 45-minute session using a SNAP app. It's all using technology, and it's actually being showcased at Elevate as we speak right now in Toronto, because we needed an interesting way to engage youth, and youth don't have technology a lot in these justice systems. So they have an iPod response system that they respond to the facilitator while it's showing on the whiteboard or on the screen. And we actually found that even though they're just getting 45 minutes a week for 12 weeks, or sometimes it's doubled up, we're seeing some really interesting findings, especially around assertion. Assertion was one of the key findings, and I know that the staff kind of went, assertion. So think about it. As we teach the kids skills on how to stop and think before they act, we're giving them language. In the facility, everybody is trained on SNAP. They're all talking similar language, whether you're in a school or whether you're in the cafeteria. So what we're giving them is language to say what their trigger is, what their body cues are, what are their hard thoughts, What are their cool thoughts? What is their stops, their now and their plans? And because we're giving them this language, they're becoming more assertive and being able to use that language and feel like what they're doing. And Mark, do you want to share
the other bit of evidence we're seeing is that they're reducing in their cognitive distortion. So they're already starting to take more perspective of how they're thinking. So those are the key goals that we had on top of feeling safe to participate. So we're really thrilled with what we're seeing in terms of the results on this.
Yeah, the safety was critical, especially when you're in a custody facility. So what we do is, so where we think with regards to ACEs, you can see that this is where we think, ACEs indicates this is where they see the scientific gaps, and this is where we think SNAP is really making a difference in regards to those pieces. What we're seeing is, this is, for example, what Dr. Reddy has been sharing with us, what we think is going on. Again, I don't think anybody can say they know what's going on, but what we think is going on. So when we look at the brain, we think that what's happening is, so we saw earlier is that with kids with externalizing and antisocial behavior, they have difficulty with the frontal areas of the brain, the same areas that deal with self-control and emotion regulation. When someone is getting aroused and angry, the primitive parts of the brain, the amygdala and limbic system, are on high alert, and you're running the risk of acting impulsively. And by using the stops, so what we're seeing is by using the stops to calm down, you can see the arrows are starting to talk to each other. You're allowing the frontal parts of the brain, the rational and control centers, to communicate with each other and take charge in the situation, and allowing the higher cognitive functions of the prefrontal cortex to plan the next move. So it's really cool to start to think. And so we have done, so the University of Toronto and Hospital for Sick Kids have done EEG studies, but in Pittsburgh, with Dustin Pardini as well as with Nathan Colin at CAMH, we're actually engaging in some structural MRIs as we speak. I'm going to bypass this video. So really what has to happen is before you can scale a program, you have to believe in the proven product. You have to have belief in the proven product. You have to know that in fact, it's been proven to be effective and proven to work. And it's not that you just say that, but others are also saying that. So here's some sample evidence for you to see. So what we're finding just on general outcomes, we're seeing that we're able to decrease externalizing behaviors like aggression and rule breaking and conduct problems and oppositional behavior. We're also improving internalizing like comorbidity issues like depression and anxiety, as well as police contact and criminal justice contact. We also are seeing increases in self-control, emotion regulation, problem solving, executive functioning, social skills, success at school, and pro-social communication. When Mark and I started to really look at the research and tried to think, okay, so we have our SNAP treatment, we know that these are the treatment outcomes we're getting, what is the mechanism of change that are going? And it wasn't until Jeff Burke and the late Dr. Rolf Lober who really started to look at our data to say, the studies that they did, the first largest randomized controlled trial showed on their second piece of the study showed that really the mechanism of change has to do with improving emotion regulation, self-control, pro-social behaviors, positive parenting behaviors, and parental stress, so decrease in parental stress. If we're able to do that, that's how we get those great treatment outcomes. Then what we found is, well, is it cost effective? Because that's the other thing to think about when you're thinking about your programs. You need to ensure A, does it work, but B, is it cost effective? So when Dr. David Farrington and Chris Kogel did these cost benefit analysis on SNAP, they actually used very conservative effect sizes, like a magnitude, which is the magnitude of change, which is 0.2 to 0.4, because that's kind of in the literature is what programs typically fall in. And just within a small effect size of 0.2, you can see that we can reduce crime by 18% and save around $89,000. Linked to a 0.4 effect size, you see about $147,000 savings with a reduction in crime around 33%. And you can see for convictions only, they found that for every dollar you spend, you save close to 4. And for all crimes, for every dollar you spend, on average you save 32, and it was up to 56. We just got our WISPY rating, which is the Washington State Institute of Public policy in December of 2018, and they found SNAP got an incredible percentage, which is 86% likelihood that SNAP will produce benefits greater than costs and a benefit to cost ratio of $4.13. And this is the article, came out of the article for Tyler's Troubled Life, the research summary. You can see that they looked at 3 model interventions, and SNAP, which is in green, had the highest averted cost, which is averted cost with SNAP could be approximately $1.2 million. So here is the example of the research. These are all published in peer-reviewed scientific journals. This is a sick kids study on the EEG, and you can see in 13 weeks they start to see some significant changes in the kids who show treatment improvement on standardized measures. You can see that when they come into the program, there's a lot of reactivity in that ventral region of the brain, and in just 13 weeks you start to see decreased reactivity and an increased reactivity in that frontal lobe. Here is the gold standard type evidence. Here's an example of one, which is the study done by Burke and Lober at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center with over 252 boys. The 70 is the clinical cutoff. That's that pink line. That means kids are doing worse than 98% of kids their age. So kids in the SNAP program fall within that top 2% of aggression, rule-breaking, and conduct. You can see from the dark line, SNAP outperforms treatment as usual. Even between the two, the effect size was 0.3. As a result of these robust findings, SNAP has received numerous awards and designations. Again, if you're introducing or trying to scale an evidence-based program, I strongly suggest that you apply for these designations from places like Crime Solutions, California Clearinghouse, Public Safety Canada. There's all kinds of different ones, National Gang Center. And in 2017 to 22, SNAP was endorsed by the federal government, which provided startup funding for us to reach about 100 communities, and as well as by the Ontario government under the Enhanced Youth Action Plan and Services for Black Children, Youth and Families. And I'm going to introduce you to LEAP because as a venture philanthropist or as a person interested in scaling programs, I'll share what they've done with us. So in order for a program to really be able to think about scaling, you have to be replicable and proven. You have to demonstrate cost benefit and being effective. You have to be a reputable organization because they're not going to invest dollars in you if you're not. You have to have expertise in implementation. You have to have a proven track record, and you have to be low risk, which means years of experience has taught us how to successfully mitigate this. So getting into the issues of implementation science, which I think many of you are wanting to hear more about. We got here because of the ability to scale of what I've already shared. And so this is our implementation process. And for a while, we were calling it our implementation framework, but having come back from the Global Implementation Conference in Glasgow a few days ago, we realized this is really a roadmap. It's like a process. So you can see that when someone is interested in adopting SNAP, we start off with doing a site assessment and community stakeholder support. We start to engage in training and consultation, which is we do 2 or 3 days lead staff training. We then do 9 days of core SNAP training if you're going to do both boys and the girls. And then once you do that, you are licensed. And the license is an annual license. When we first started, the license was $1. And we heard from our SNAP affiliates that people value what they pay for and that they would rather see an ongoing licensing agreement because it shows their commitment, but also we're always constantly updating the information for our affiliates. Once you're trained, you then move into consultation activities. And consultation activities are quite intense. And you can see we have site implementation support for years 1 to 2, where we do a lot of staff engagement, leadership commitment, financial, physical space. We help you with program implementation support around assessment, treatment and service planning. We also then in year 2 to 4 move towards more program expansion and component-specific support. The first core pieces of the parent group and the children group are kind of the hardest to get going. Once you get that going, you need to absolutely ensure that the children and families are getting everything they need based on their level of risk and need, which are the adjunct SNAP components, like individual befriending, family support, community hookup, teacher support. And then you can see that training doesn't end. Staff, they have new staff that come on board. So then therefore you need to train new staff. there's refresher training, as well as any kind of specialized training, whether it's gender, trauma, etc. And then you could see all that is built within a scientist practitioner model where we do ongoing program fidelity reviews, evaluation and research, and ongoing program fidelity reviews. Fidelity, fidelity, fidelity. That's what Dean Fixon said. Don't forget about fidelity. So 19 years we've been engaged in implementation science. We have trained numerous practitioners, hundreds, I think thousands of practitioners around the world. And we've also have an extensive network of scientists, practitioners, etc. So scaling, what do you need? So more grit, more heart, and more courage. And I'm going to go faster now because we have about 10 minutes left before we get on to some of the questions. So with regards to this, these are the lessons learned. We realized very quickly it's all about relationships. As you start your scaling journey, you've got to build strong relationships. You got to build relationships with your networks, with your affiliates. And we were very fortunate. One of the key people we worked with very early on was Lynn Baptist from the J.W. McConnell Family Foundation. And she was a huge champion of our work and supported it and believed in us and is what we call the godmother of SNAP. And then in 2012, we were selected by the LEAP Center, LEAP/PICO Center for Social Impact, to scale SNAP across Canada. And that was in honor of David Pico, who really supported new innovations and strategies like SNAP. So I'm going to get into this one a little bit. I'm going to show you whiteboard, and hopefully this video works. Yes, yay.
Making an impact in the world is about more than just good intentions. With over 85,000 charities in Canada, it can be difficult to identify and support the ones with the greatest potential. And often, nonprofits require significantly more resources and business expertise to realize their potential. Introducing LEAP. LEAP is inspired by the legacy of corporate strategist and civic entrepreneur David Pico, who mobilized the private sector to help solve social issues. Just as private equity investors use their expertise to help proven businesses succeed, our venture philanthropy model applies this approach to help charities achieve massive social impact. We run a deep due diligence to select high-impact organizations with great ideas and measurable results. LEAP then commits for the long term, providing hands-on support and surrounding them with our private sector partners, the Boston Consulting Group, EY, COSET, McCarthy Tetro, Hill and Knowlton Strategies, and the Offer Group. We unlock nonprofit sector potential through forward-thinking donors who invest in LEAP and our portfolio charities. By applying these approaches and engaging our partners, the services provided by these leading nonprofits are no longer limited. We help nonprofits reach their potential by growing their social impact from a local level to a national one, helping more Canadians across the country. Partner with us to achieve massive social impact.
So we actually were their inaugural social innovation to scale across Canada. And so their strategy, when you think about a venture philanthropy model, works like this. You take smart money with strategic partners, industry experts, and our industry experts are people like Boston Consulting Group, who helped us with our strategy and our implementation plan. EY helped us build our system. Perennial and COSET, for example, helped us with our branding and marketing. McCarthy Tetro helped us with legal. Offer Group helped us with fund development. And Hill and Knowlton with government relations. And that was about $3 million in pro bono. So think about, as a not-for-profit, we don't have that kind of money to be able to do that kind or have that kind of access to those kind of supports. And then you take a proven social innovation like SNAP, and all these together can help create massive social change and impact across Canada. And so here are some of our strategic partners, founding partners, and our LEAP private sector partners. So one of the things I'm going to share with you is some nuggets I also took away from the Global Implementation Conference. So one of the things was I found my people, and we did find our people. And it's really important to find your people and think about who they are. And the focus on shared vision and moral purpose for change, you have to think about what is your focus and what is your moral purpose for change. And scaling is about change, system change. It isn't, scaling isn't about rearranging the boxes. We have to focus on what we want the future to be. So these are just some nuggets, and you can go on that Twitter feed and see lots more. So the goal of LEAP's engagement to grow SNAP in Canada was you take this deeply rooted program, SNAP, in scientific methodology and start to scale it, which is infuse it in business skills and planning, build capacity and fidelity, sustain growth across the country so that the goal was it could be available to every child and family that needs it in Canada. And if we do that with our business partners, we could be able to potentially reach our goal. And this was the $1 million slide. This was the slide that have all of us, because we're in year 3 of this strategy, really going, yikes. Anybody in the field of implementation science will say, whoa, that's really an aggressive key performance indicators. So we started with this strategy. We were at around 20 sustainable sites. And the goal is to increase it to 100, reaching about 140 communities. Why that number is different? For example, in the Cree Nation government right now, we have 1 license, but we're in 9 of their communities. So that's why that's a new moving number. But the strategy you can see says kids are in school. So how do we increase our awareness and identify high-risk children to get them, this is business language now, fill the pipeline to whether they're in children's mental health, not-for-profits, so that you can improve how many kids you can reach and how many trainings, et cetera, headquarters, which a SNAP can do. So it increases the number of sites, increases children per site. And that's using our evidence-based boys and girls program. And if we can do that, we can potentially raise anywhere from 14 to 20,000 high-risk kids in the next 5 years. This was our engagement with LEAP. You can see that there was an extensive selection process that involved in planning, that involved capacity building, and in scale, which we're in right now. And then we become alumni, which we work with others, just like me sharing this information. I would do that with their LEAP portfolios. But you can see that this is a very complex thing that took many years to get us to where we are. So what we found is the venture philanthropy model can and does work. It brings together government, it brings together the business sector, it brings together foundations and individual donors and community partners to create massive social change. And so what we have, and what they did for us, which was the learning, is they said, okay, this is your roadmap. Where are we going? So we would go wherever we were asked to go. And they said, no, you need to be strategic. So we're going to do an assessment across the country to determine, based on poverty and density, where the need is in regards to kids with conduct type problems. And so they found that through this geo-mapping exercise, Ontario had the highest identified need, followed by Quebec, and then BC. Let me break down what one of those things look like, those circles. So a circle, for example, Montreal, if I go into one circle, that's what it looks like. It shows me where every police station is, where every children's mental health center is, YMCA, Boys and Girls Club. And it also identifies, for example, where the local or key children's mental health center might be. So you can imagine, the venture philanthropy model required us to reach 100 sites, 140 communities, and raise $12 million. So our organization, not them, our organization had to raise $12 million. And we had to raise the $12 million for a reason. First of all, put this in perspective, we're a not-for-profit organization relying on government support and the philanthropic community ourselves. We had to raise $12 million, was going to be used to support organizations interested in adopting and implementing SNAP. It would provide $55,000 to $80,000 worth for startup costs. And startup costs were training, consultation/coaching, materials, equipment, and possibly some backfill dollars. But the organization who adopted SNAP would have to provide a dedicated staff to deliver SNAP in their community. And guess what? We did it. We did it in 2.5 years. We were able to raise $12+ million. So when I think about this, I think about it like this. So I think about somebody bungee jumping. And you think about, and I shared this before when I did the GIC keynote, so I hope you can hear this, is I'm going to actually turn this volume down. There we go. So you could see that this person, I want you to think about this is us. This is us, and this is LEAP holding on to us and everybody else, saying, you're harnessed, you've got all the proper equipment, you can do this. You've got it. We've got you, you've got everything you need, you can do this. But then I also flip it to think about, this is our affiliate site. We're the guy in the blue now, and we're telling our affiliate site, you know, if you come on board, we are going to support you. We're going to give you the right training. We're going to give you the right consultation support. We're going to give you the right equipment and materials, and then you fly, okay? So, and it takes a village. We cannot do this in isolation. It takes multiple partners to get us there. So common goals and competing priorities, I'm going to go a little bit faster. If I can, believe me, I can go faster, is common goals and competing priorities. Lots of pressure from our SNAP implementation and research team, from our boards and executive, from our government funders and our champions, our own clinical team, and our community and systems people. And we're being pulled because everybody wants something a little bit different. And so you have to think about how you're going to manage that. You have to continue to find new and compelling ways to tell your story. Because one of the things we kept hearing time and time again, we were one of the best kept secrets. And that was interesting, that a lot of people did not know about it. The importance of keeping the scientist practitioner framework alive and active. If you're going to walk away from anything, this is critical. Not only do you have to continue to invest in your clinical and your research, because they go hand in hand, but now if you're going to scale, you have to engage in really good implementation and fidelity monitoring. Because if you don't know if it's working, and you don't know if it's working in the same communities. So, importance of continually building the evidence. Mark and I created this evidence-based implementation evaluation checklist. It is published, and it would be in the handout. It's really about engaging in program planning, process evaluation, continuing to build the knowledge, and ensuring that what you're doing works. Because implementation is a process and requires repeated measures, not a one-time assessment. And this barometer helps us to keep on track to say, are we on track with program planning activities? Are we on track with process evaluation? And are we on track with doing the best possible, building the best possible evidence that we can? And collect data that is useful to practitioners for improving practice, because that sometimes is not always easy. And evidence-based knowledge is worth noting. If you aren't able to implement with practitioners, it's just not going to work. So that's in the true spirit of the scientist practitioner model. And this was an interesting quote from a participant. The biggest issue when trying to implement many programs is hostility to evidence-based research and scientific methods. And you could fill in the blank in your community, who might that be? And really, randomized controlled trials are not easy, but they're critical. So a data system, and we're almost at the end here. So a data system plays a critical role. So we have to figure out, how are we going to keep all of this together? So think about your own innovations. How do you keep things together? So we had to create a data system, and Mark has been leading this, Bill. So think about something that could potentially help with case management if the organization doesn't have a case management system. Pre-implementation, fidelity monitoring, implementation activities, dissemination, and community of practice and operations. So, and as Dean Fixon said, fidelity is at the core of implementation science. You have to think, are we doing what we intended to do? How do we know if we're doing what we intended to do, and does it make a difference? So what is the SNAP-IT system that we've been engaged in? It's a cloud-based fidelity monitoring tool designed to coordinate, support, and measure implementation and service delivery activities to enhance capacity to evaluate overall commitments to the model. And so here's what it looks like in a nutshell. It allows us to do all these various pre-implementation activities, implementation, case management. It also has an evaluation portal, and that's the SNAP-IT video portal. And all these things help us to ensure that the program is being delivered with high fidelity and integrity, and helps us to track all the different data points in these different aspects. We also know it's extremely secure and private. And here's just an example of dashboards it will produce and help organizations start to tell their story about their data. For example, where are the kids waiting? Where are we doing? Where is our reach on our thing? How many consultation hours? How many consultation training? So these are all different things that it helps us do. So planning for implementation is as important as actually implementing. And because when you think about it, your plan sometimes looks like this. You have a clear vision. What you think your plan is it's a straight line. But in fact, in reality, this is really what your plan looks. And so you have to think about this as you scale and as you implement. And here's just an example. It took around 459 days. This is pre-implementation timeline for one organization who said, we really want this program in our community, to the point of going in and saying we want it, to the point where they were ready to start training, 459 days. Now what we're doing is we're actually getting better because the data is being able to tell us that. So it's that persistence. And really what we also say, it's all about problem solving. That you have to think about, these are complex situations, and you have to think about how are you going to meet those different things. And I love this thing, which is we need to continue to have a strong positive spirit and wit to solve problems and think about how we're going to do things differently.
At some point, everything's going to go south on you. Everything's going to go south, and you're going to say, this is it. This is how I end. Now, you can either accept that, or you can get to work. That's all it is. You just begin. You do the math. You solve one problem, and you solve the next one, and then the next. And if you solve enough problems, you get to come home.
Great example from the movie The Martian. So stages of implementation completion, we've been working really closely with Lisa Saldana to help us to ensure that that the different stages of implementation are working. And so here, very quickly, I'm going to go over quickly because we're running out of time, but really around pre-implementation, it looks at engagement, it looks at consideration of feasibility, it looks at readiness planning. The implementation stage looks at, do you have the right staff? Do you have the right training? Do you have the right fidelity monitoring in place? Are your services and consultation coaching, are you starting that? And model fidelity and staff competency and adherence tracked. Are you being able to track all this? And the last piece is around sustainability, which is looking at competency. So this is how that model looks that we've been really working closely, and we will have data again to help us assess that. And just you can see that from a very preliminary perspective, we're starting to see that if we do our pre-implementation activities correct, which we are starting to, you can see in 2016, we weren't there, you can start to see that it's getting easier if we do this right. So here is the SNAP implementation pipeline, how we monitor things. You can see that there's a pre-implementation pool. This is like our pipeline where we connect with organizations, and you can see there's this pipeline which looks at potential sites, active sites, prospects, sites that are going into contracting, maybe sites that just didn't fit at the end. And you can see we look at fit, which is fit, feasibility, and readiness to make sure that we are engaging with the right organizations. So I'm going to bypass this piece because it's going to be in your handout. The next piece we talked about, which is really important about being adaptable and responsible, and it's not enough to know, you have to be able to do, and that takes the action. So you also have to think, diversify your funding model. You can't only rely on one funding source because that won't work. So here are 3 funding models that LEAP, for example, came up with us, where, for example, you can see that government gives the organizations dollars, and they also then funneled some dollars to us. The funder will fund directly to SNAP, and then SNAP disseminates the dollars. This is actually happening in Florida with the Florida Network. The Department of Juvenile Justice is giving the Florida Network the dollars. They then are the purveyors of SNAP in that community and work closely with us, and they choose the organization, ensure that they are trained. It's a trainer-trainer model there. So there are different models to think about when you think about your costs. We know, no ifs, ands, or buts, government can absolutely expedite your expansion efforts, and with the support from Public Safety Canada and the federal government and the Ontario government, we are finding that when that happens, that's a lot easier and more successful. And you can have the most effective programs and model possible, but with buy-in without government buy-in or top officials, you won't be able to scale. There's an example of the Florida one. And then here are the 2 pieces that we think were really critical that we developed as part of this, which is a regional mobilization strategy, which means what we know is we from Toronto needed to find champions in every province and territory who really understood the landscape of their communities. And so we have hired these wonderful regional champions who work with us, who understand government, children's mental health, child welfare, and community stakeholders to help us get to the door in a timely manner. And if we're able to do that, we feel that it's important to build this community-specific implementation plan, which means you're not going in and going in alone. So that pink box is our licensed SNAP affiliate. Our licensed SNAP affiliate then works with local elementary schools to deliver SNAP universally, but with an understanding that the school will then ensure that the top 2% of kids that are really struggling will get access to timely and effective services of SNAP in their local community. And then you have your community team that is comprised of police, children's mental health, not-for-profits, etc., who can work together to ensure that this program sustains and continues to meet the needs of their community. So change management is absolutely imperative. I remember going, change management, what is that? Change management is critical because you're continually changing, and you need to think about that. And your team are the ones driving the change, and you have to think about what you're doing to ensure, A, you have the right team members with the right skills, and you're investing in your team members because you're only as good as your team. And as Jeff Weiner says, you have to dream big, you got to get shit done, get stuff done, and know how to have fun. And I'm very thankful to all these community partners who have enabled us from the original founders to our team, to our network partners, everybody who has helped us with government, etc., to all our community partners and affiliates who have really become our village. And these are just some of them, because it really goes, it takes a village. That's the thing that if you're going to walk away with anything, you've got to surround yourself. And as a result, we are actually doing this. We're in year 3. We are at 50 Canadian sites and 30 international sites for a total of 80. And in the next 3 years, we still have room for another, I think, 40 implementations to meet our goals for Canadian sites interested in implementing SNAP. So when we first started, this was basically us running all over the place, and we didn't have any business. But today we're actually hopping together and we're more consistent with what we're doing. And really the final thoughts is, don't be afraid to take risks and stay calm in the eye of the storm. It's a great article by Molly Graham, and there's some resources, but really those are the key takeaways. And the reason we're doing this work is, I love this drawing by Alex Milo Love, is what Pam Leo says, we don't want to raise children who have to recover from their childhoods. So that is where we're at, so thank you.
Don't forget to use your SNAP.
Sorry, I think I went a little bit over, but we have time for some questions, I hope.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That was a very rich presentation with lots of ideas, and we're very grateful for your thoughts. I think one of the things that why this was suggested that you be a presenter was that it would be inspiring, that we could see many of our programs are just at the very beginning of this journey where you were in 1985. And so you've given us a vision and a path of where you can go. I'm going to just ask you a few questions that have come up along the way. And
sure.
So the first question was, in your scaling process, how did you maintain fidelity of your program if the capacity of an organization was limited in its implementation of staff?
Sure,
So,
and Mark is also here, and we'll tag team here. So fidelity was built in from the model from the beginning. So especially for the group component, because the group component was really what really separated SNAP from a lot of the models. So we really did adherence first, adherence to the manual. Were they actually delivering the program according to the manual? Because that was critical. And then as we started to grow and learn more, we realized there was another level, which is fidelity, which is competency skills that added to the fidelity piece. You could use the manual, but were you using warmth? Were you using humor? Were you using those competency skills that could engage with the kids? So I think my advice to you is ensure that you develop fidelity practices into your model from the very beginning. And then you're going to start to learn. Every time we think we're there, we still have to develop another piece to this. I think we're all learning. This field of implementation science is pretty new. It's been around for a long time, but I think we're really just starting. And having coming back from Glasgow, I think the message was there's a lot more that needs to be done. But start from fidelity from the beginning. Marg, I don't know if you have.
Yeah, no, fidelity is not an easy thing to monitor. And I think also important is to know exactly what you need to monitor to ensure that you're monitoring the right things in terms of fidelity to your model. So that in itself is an important exercise.
Absolutely. So I guess the question is, what is it that you are doing?
So maybe following up on that, it's like, how did you decide what parts of SNAP were core to fidelity and what parts could be adapted?
Sure, good question. We knew that the groups were critical. We knew that we had these kids with us for an X period of time, which was an hour and a half a week for 12 weeks, and their parents. And so therefore, it was incredibly cost effective, first of all, to teach the kids the strategy in that group format. Also, it was also really critical for other kids of similar age and experiences to be able to challenge these kids on their own versus an adult challenging them, right? Because it's more towards their experience. So therefore, that was really important that the group pieces were really, really monitored closely to ensure that the staff were using the core principles, cognitive behavioral strategies, and that the strategy would actually be delivering right. Because we do a lot of role plays, we do a lot of behavioral rehearsal, we do discussion, we watch the videos, we talk about them, the parents get to see the videos as well. So those were critical pieces. And so in the parent group, the parents are learning effective parent management strategies. And so therefore, we also had to monitor fidelity to make sure that all the important components of that weekly session covered in the group. And so what we were able to look at, did dosage and quality of the fidelity equal outcome?
Okay, great. Then there's another question about the Bengali community in Toronto worked with SNAP years ago to help immigrant parents adapt and work with their children. Recent events in the community show that teenagers in the community have an even higher rate of suicide in the South Asian community. How would an NFP access SNAP for their community in Toronto?
So two things. If they're interested in adopting SNAP, we would be able to provide that organization with free training, consultation materials, and equipment to become a SNAP licensed site. So currently under the Services for Black Children, Families, and Communities, for example, they selected 5 organizations, 2 in Ottawa and 3, but under the venture philanthropy model, which is the model that I described today, we actually have the dollars to be able to provide organizations in Canada with the ability to implement SNAP, but they have to provide the staff. But absolutely have them contact me, and I would be absolutely able to assist them with looking into this more. But again, the key is being able to deliver the program the way it's intended for the clients that it needs to serve.
Okay, great. We're at the end of our time, so I'm going to have to shut it down right now, but I just want to say a huge thank you. You have so many lessons and so much wisdom. It's been wonderful to hear, and we will be having a handout that will summarize some of these issues. And I just want to thank everybody for participating today, and especially to Leena and Marg for their great thoughts, their experience, and their wonderful wisdom. And we'd also like to remind you to share your feedback with us about today's webinar, to take our 2-minute anonymous survey, and the link is in your chat box. So thank you, everybody.
Wendy, you're very welcome. What I would suggest to you is if there were any questions, I'd be happy to address them and then attach it to the handout.
Oh, okay. So just send in your questions and we can.
Yeah, absolutely. I apologize for not having enough time.
You got a lot of wisdom to share. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.